and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Planet Policy Pals. I'm Ala, and I'm joined here with Ajwa. Hey girl.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Nice. Anything new with you?
Not much, except that I'm finally going home.
Aw, yes. I can't believe you got to come here and I didn't see you again. Damn.
That's what happens when you broke.
Oh my god. Okay, so, and if you want to solve that problem, please donate on our website. So, today we're continuing our series on the link between the environment, especially the climate, and major industries. On the last two episodes, we talked about textile production and some of the countries that were stepping up to regulate the processes, as well as how mass consumption of fashion basically affects our environment. Today, we are going to discuss the meat industry, which contributes less than fashion to environmental degradation, but, it's still a major problem. So, environmental news, before we get into things, the European Commission is planning to propose a sustainable food labeling network to reach its net carbon emission goal by 2050. However, some experts like Professor Matthias Finkbeiner, chair of Sustainable Engineering at Technical University Berlin, suggest they must first address several key challenges. Some of those challenges are things like product definition, universal standardization, measuring success, things like that. Because you can have different ways to regulate these things, but it's not always across the board and everyone measures differently. How dire do you think these issues will be as they try to institute more food labeling, Ajwa?
I think some of these concerns are definitely valid, but there are quite a bit of certifications that are present on different levels that can verify how eco-friendly a food product is. EU already has eco-labeling set in place that they actually claim, and I quote, makes green choices easy. So there's different parties that can do it, that can certify your product. So like I said, I think it is a good basis for challenge, but I think it is definitely a good step in the right direction, and I really don't think that these are really big issues to be addressed.
Well, yeah, you're right. There are different avenues for certification depending on who's doing it. Like, you can do it and you can get a second party, like the buyer, to do it, or a third party, like an outside agency. But yeah, the issue of universal standards, I think, is their biggest problem. But like you said, they already have a system in place and they just need to improve on what they have. So, like I said, today we are going to be talking about meat, another industry that is very popular when people are discussing ways to curb emissions and help the environment. Just a quick fact, the Worldwatch Institute data notes that people in industrial countries eat an average of 176 pounds of meat per person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. I was like, in a year, that's it seems like a large number. A record high of 335 million tons of meat were produced in 2018, according to the FAO. That's the Food and Agriculture Organization in the US. In this episode, we are going to look at why we consume so much meat to begin with, the environmental impact of our consumption, what meat sources are most sustainable, and the benefits of small-scale versus larger industrialized meat farming practices. So let's just jump into it, right? Do a little background of why we started eating so much fucking meats to begin with. A lot of archaeological and paleontological evidence, oh, look at me with the big words, indicate that some of our ancestors increased meat consumption and developed this tools and stuff while their brains and bodies were evolving as well. as we were going from like niche foraging and hunting and kind of expanding. And this began like 3 million years ago. If we jump forward a couple million years, we arrive at humans starting to rely heavily on meat for proteins and other nutrients. So there are studies that show that almost every nutrient you get in your meat, you could get from a diet that was rich in legumes, vegetables, nuts, and insects. So just start eating some crickets, guys. Oh my God. Okay, but for real, the one thing when I was looking through that I found that maybe other sources of protein don't have is tryptophan. It's a source of nicotinamide, and having tryptophan has effects on your serotonin and your social behavior, which made me, based on all this research, I was thinking, so like we basically eat meat because it makes us feel good and interact with people. I think that's why we become so dependent on it. Guys, I love meat, so I really wanted to know, like, why can I not stop eating meat?
Now you know.
Yeah, now I know. If we come to modern times, so there's technically considered 3 food regimes. The first one is linked to like the free trade era that happened in the 1870s and between the 1870s and the First World War. This guy called Friedman and this other guy called McMichael identified this first food regime. And they said it's centered on European imports of wheat and meat from settler states like Argentina, Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand. This cheaper food was what helped underwrite British and other European industrial growth. That's how they grew so big, basically. Which brings us to the second regime, which was characterized by basically heavy subsidies for domestic food production. So we started with all this importing in the first one, and by the second one, people were like, all right, we need to start subsidizing. Like the government is like, we need to start giving money to these industries because we need to start relying on making our own food. It was also super capital centric, right? The first one was very capital centric. This one was as well, but it added trade and industrial capital. It added like a big focus on states and, nations, and also a sort of agrarian capital. That's what the second regime had that the first one was missing. And that brings us to the third regime, which followed economic deregulations. So as we started to deregulate just basically financial dealings more and how companies could come together, then companies started being like, okay, like this is no longer just trading, and it's definitely no longer state-based. It's now really, really profit-based. And that's kind of what we're seeing left over today.
Now we know where it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. So if we look at meat through this lens, right, of this whole agriculture, food development, we can see like the strong economical and financial ties reflected in the industry. A lot of people will say that it's expensive to switch to like a vegan or a vegetarian lifestyle. But I personally think when we're saying that, we're thinking about things where people are buying meat substitutes or where people are buying like really expensive things like vegan cheese as opposed to a diet that relies on like nuts and legumes, that sort of thing. So I saw this study basically in 2017, a 58-item questionnaire measuring behavior and behavioral intention concerning meat consumption was applied to 455 consumers in the Eastern Mediterranean region of Turkey. And they wanted to see how these people planned their meals. The reason they were doing this was because at the time, in 2016, I think, the price of red meat in Turkey began to like grow rapidly. It starts becoming expensive. So they wanted to see if the people were willing to choose other cheaper white meat substitutes versus red meat as the prices increased. And yeah, people were. But the interesting thing I found is that even as this happened, where the people they surveyed were seeming to buy less red meat, the prices did not drop. The prices stayed high and they continued to produce red meat. So like, are just rich people in Turkey eating red meat? I don't know. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, and then, so there was another study regarding whether vegetarian diets are more affordable. The scientists in Switzerland compared vegetarian, Mediterranean, and US diets. And they found that if people were shopping online, they would save $2 a day being vegetarian. A second study, which was done here in the US, found that vegetarian meals are cheaper as long as you're eating seasonal produce, local shopping, and eating basic staples. So like if you are eating like a bunch of superfoods and protein powders and like those meat substitutes, things like that, then you're basically not gonna save money the same way. The problem now is like whenever people are thinking of leaving meat, they really are big on these meat substitutes. We're so conditioned to the taste of meat, I think. So agriculture was ranked number 3 by the IPCC for sectors contributing to climate change. And we know that cows and ruminants, they emit methane, which we know is a potent greenhouse gas, as they digest grasses and plants. Fun fact, everybody always says it's cow farts, but it's actually mostly cow burps. And I really want to stress this. It's their burps, not their farts, that are causing the most problems. That is the big point I wanted to make.
Very important.
Yeah, of course, animal feed like uses up a bunch of land. So we want to be conscientious with that. And we have to keep growing animal feed. So that's, a carbon cost as well as the transport cost and the fossil fuels it takes to just maintain the farms. So speaking of these climate impacts, I wonder which ones, are better or worse. Ajwa, care to tell us?
Well, of course, I think everybody has this really $1,000,000 question, which meat is good, because let's be real, we're not giving up meat anytime soon. So the way that we will measure or we will compare is the climate change impact will be in carbon dioxide equivalents. And this metric basically converts the global warming potential of greenhouse gases like methane, which is especially relevant when we talk about meat production, into an equivalent amount of carbon dioxide. Now, of course, if we start with beef, we have to. It is, as we all know, literally the worst thing. If you think there's anything worse for the environment, it's your steak. Okay? And between 27 and 60 kilograms carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram greenhouse gas emission, more than 6 kg carbon dioxide equivalent per serving. Beef tops most lists as the most carbon intensive of all foods.
It makes me feel very guilty. I literally just had beef.
Yeah, no, beef is probably the worst meat to have if you're trying to, get off of it. In fact, a single pound of beef takes, on average, 1,800 gallons of water to produce.
Oh my God, no!
Yeah. But to be fair, 98% of that goes to watering the grass, forage, and feed that cattle consume over their lifetime.
Damn.
So when we talk about poultry, so there was this international study, Poor and Nemesek, that found that poultry averages to about 6 kilogram carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of meat. So that's, in comparison to your beef, it's way, way less.
Yeah.
So poultry is probably the best kind of meat that you can have out here.
Great. I eat a lot of chicken.
That's actually good. Eggs have an even less impact than meat and they can easily be produced more sustainably at home. So if you want protein, if you're looking to turn into a vegetarian diet, eggs are still good, so don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Pigs, pork. The overall emissions from pork production are in the range of 7 to 12 kilogram carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of meat. So that's less than a third of the emissions that we get from beef.
Beef is not looking so hot right now.
Beef is not at all hot. Let me just tell you that. Fish is a large and widely varied category. So prawns and salmon, they can produce similar emissions to pork, while wild-caught fish can have a lower impact than even eggs.
That's interesting. I think we're seeing a trend where the farming is the biggest problem.
Yeah, But with poultry and pork, the runner from the farms is basically what pollutes the water. There's there's manure in the water, unlike beef that you is also very water intensive just to produce it.
So yeah, I mean, you don't want runoff in your water for sure. It's definitely unsafe. I think something we can do when it comes to meat emissions is eat more goat meat.
Actually, during this research that I was doing, goat and lamb are only second to emissions to beef.
I was very confused by that because I saw only in that study that they put goat up there. And in another study, I saw that goat contributes about 6% of entire emission of GHGs. It's very confusing. Disparity. I wonder why that is.
If we are talking about wondering why that is, the difference is, like you said, obviously, where you produce this meat has a massive impact, right? So if you're producing this meat, let's say the way that meat is produced in the US is very different to the way that meat is produced in, let's say, Iceland, because it's small, the demand is low, it's the emissions are lower than what it's going to be if it's produced in the US. Correct?
Fair enough. And I also wonder if they grouped goat with lamb in that study because it's a US based study, and most of the times here a lot, like a goat is not something that's eaten a lot locally in the US. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like if you're producing lamb in Iceland, it produces less than half of what the US average carbon dioxide equivalent is for lamb.
So these impacts, like you said, they're pretty in depth. And I guess we've established that beef is the worst. But what else do you think about these sources as far as large versus small impacts?
We know the average American will eat 57.5 pounds of beef this year. Our World in data looked at both short-lived, which is methane, and long-lived carbon gas emissions, and placed beef products near the top of both lists. So of course we know. But sadly, for non-vegan vegetarians, emissions from cheese are similar to those of beef and lamb, and they routinely rank above most meats. So usually buying local cheese can help, but no matter how you look at it, climate cost of cows is shockingly high.
An interesting thing that I saw, right? A lot of vegan cheeses use soy. Now cashew and stuff too. But the way people have begun farming soy recently is slowly becoming unsustainable as well.
Yep, agreed. But we know that just switching from beef to chicken may reduce the climate impact of your food by half. In fact, in the UK, the Climate Change Committee has advised the government that they should urge the public to eat less meat. Now, a key fact about meat carbon footprints is that beef and lamb may trade places, but again, like we said, only in the US, but they do top every list.
They do, yeah. I saw that globally. They top every list.
In fact, like the worldwide consumption of meat and animal products, they make up to 27% of humanity's total water footprint.
What the fuck?
Yeah, but of that total, like I said, 98% is due to the water required, that is, to produce this animal feed, and then the water for drinking, cleaning, and feed mixing constitutes 1.1%, 0.8%, and 0.03% respectively. But of course, there's big scale and then there's small scale, so there's, that debate. Do you want to tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the thing is, you will assume, right, that small-scale farming will have lower emissions. At least when we talk about it with agriculture, we talk a lot about how smallholder farms are important. But there's also data showing that industrialized farming is actually more efficient. And if stuff is more efficient, you get more meat and dairy with fewer animals. I think, like you said, the discrepancy exists because of these varying needs, depending on where you live and how the farms where you live are run. As an example, in Nigeria, right, it's more of a nomadic lifestyle where the cows kind of move around and graze in different areas. The people who farm cows in Nigeria, like herders, they don't actually try to regrow that land. They just let it grow naturally and then they come back, which we have a beef shortage. So I don't know if we're doing it the best. But in the US, right, the cow using industrial methods will produce 1,000 pounds of meat for every 10 pounds, as opposed to a place where they are using this grazing method and a cow will produce about 100 pounds in comparison. So it's 10 times more from the same animal. You know what I mean? I think like some of the things we can do, like, yes, there are some smallholder techniques that leave a smaller environmental impact. Like my mom has a farm in Nigeria, in River State. It's called Amgag Farms. Quick plug for her. She listens to this podcast. I just want her to hear me plug her. But some experts, like I said, like some things you could think about, right? Speaking about this impact of efficiency and productivity on a smaller footprint, right? This UC Davis animal scientist called Frank Mitloehner. I'm sorry, Frank. He said that basically having a good life cycle assessment of the animal footprint is key. And a life cycle assessment is just this thing that you do in production and manufacturing, where you look at the impact of something from the raw materials all the way to distribution. It has like 5 or 6 steps, depending on who's doing it. But the average dairy cow in California will produce 20,000 pounds of milk a year, whereas the average dairy cow in Mexico produces only 4,000 pounds of milk a year. And in India, it's 1,000 pounds. So this difference in meat, exactly. So in India, you need more cows to get the same amount of milk than you would get in America. And in fact, the carbon footprint of American milk today is 63% lower than in 1944 due to the simple fact that we have less cows. I did not believe it either. I honestly thought we had way more cows. Apparently we have less than we did in the 40s. Go figure. Another thing you could do is improve disease resistance, which I know you guys don't want to hear this, but the way to reduce the diseases is with genetics and breeding. And I know you guys dread the word genetically modified, but there you have it. You can either eat meat that has tons of antibiotics because the animals keep getting sick because of the farming practices, true, but also because animals get sick, or you can hope for better genetics.
Yeah. For all those people who do not believe in this. Yeah.
80% of the total antibiotic use in total in the US is in agriculture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and pigs and poultry get the most. So human beings aren't even using the antibiotics as much. And this isn't something that has conclusive evidence yet, but there are theories that this kind, eating all this poultry and eating all this pig that has taken tons of antibiotics, is why we're starting to see more and more antibiotic resistant strains of diseases. You know what I mean? So those are just two ways.
That's interesting.
Yeah, those are just two ways if you look at it. Not to mention, like, we could be using less land, right, for feeding and things like that. And if we were exporting and importing meat more, then certain places just wouldn't have to farm meat. But that's a whole different bag of worms. Is it bag of worms?
Let's not go there yet.
Yeah, let's not go there yet. So these are some surprising techniques, regarding how large-scale farming can actually be productive. On the flip side, are there small-scale techniques that might be beneficial?
So small farms, of course, when there's a reason why the hype behind them for being sustainable is there. They do have proven to improve soil quality, because in factory farming, very little thought is given to soil health. But on small farms, the soil is the heart and soul of the whole operation. And so it's treated with a lot of respect. Small farms, they often try to, they don't only just maintain the quality of the soil, but they actually try to improve it over time, so that future generations will profit even more from these farming methods. Another thing that I thought small farming did that was really cool is food security. Now, small farms grow a lot more diverse crop selection. Like bigger farms, they only grow a single crop on a very large scale. And in bad years, big parts of the harvest can be lost. Although, let's be real, big farms are probably using a lot more of those GMOs or these antibiotics to make sure that that doesn't happen. But small farms can help to counteract the food system's instability in those years that you do tend to lose crops.
And I think that that's something that we should adopt seriously at large scale farming. Like, one person, especially with all the subsidization, of course you're going to grow what gets you the most money. Just growing only corn, come on. Like, you have to grow a mix of things. It's the earth friendliest way to farm.
You definitely do want to keep mixing up. Since we're talking about farming techniques, here's an organization to check out. And it was, by the way, founded by a woman, because of
Yay.
course. It's called the Animal Welfare Institute. It has been around since the 1951, and they have been alleviating suffering that has been inflicted on animals by humans. Their founder, Christine Stevens, she sought an end to cruel treatment of animals in experimental labs, and now her work obviously expanded to take on other animal welfare causes. She has actually worked with policymakers, scientists, industry, and the policy. And the AWI, under Institute, of course, they seek to abolish factory farms, improve the housing and handling of animals and research. They also are working to end the use of steel jaw leg hold traps and reform other brutal methods of capturing. They are working on preserving species threatened with extinction, protect wildlife and their habitats. And so basically like a bunch of stuff that she's really working on.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty cool organization that all of you can check out.
Thank you, Ajwa. Next episode, we are going to continue this discussion about meat by focusing more on some of our biggest consumers, our biggest producers, and also some of our most sustainable practices that we're seeing in terms of regulation of the meat industry. Unlike the fashion industry, there's actually regulation in the meat industry that's important because it's food. So it's easier to go from there to the environment. So we're going to look at those, discuss them a little bit, and discuss ways that experts are saying you can have more sustainable meat farming. We're also going to highlight some content creators in the vegetarian and vegan space. So look out for that.
Also look out for a graph that we have for your GHGs for your food product. So go check it out to see what you can substitute for your food.
Yeah, it's in the show notes, guys. So what do you guys think? Do you think the environmental impact of meat is worth going vegetarian or vegan? Are there changes you're going to implement in your own diet? I could say that personally, I have been trying to eat less meat. And now after this, guys, I'm going to promise here that I will be trying my very hardest to stop eating beef. Except oxtail.
Will you though?
Except oxtail.
Okay.
So yeah, reach out to us if you have questions, suggestions, changes. We would like to know. Check out our website, planetpolicypals.com, for updates and show notes as well as references on everything we talked about. Check out our YouTube page because our YouTube videos have captions if you need them. Email us, leave a voicemail, rate us, review us. If you have any questions at all about meat consumption or the environment, we always want to hear, and we will put you in the episode. Follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram at Planet Policy Pals, and like our Facebook page. But until then,
Keep learning, pals.